I was afraid to admit to myself that I loved him. Not because Zayn would have laughed at me. Honestly, that would have been easier to handle. If he'd called me pathetic, or weird, or told me he didn't feel the same, at least everything would have been clear. No, what scared me was the possibility that he did feel something too. Because if that was true, then everything between us was about to change. And I wasn't sure I could survive losing him. Zayn had been my best friend since freshman year of college. We met because he accidentally stole my coffee order from the campus cafe and then spent 10 minutes insisting he'd make it up to me by buying lunch. I remember thinking he was annoying at first. Too confident. Too charming. Too good-looking without even trying. Tall, dark curls always messy like he just rolled out of bed, tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves, this lazy smirk that somehow made everyone around him relax instantly. Girls loved him. Guys wanted to be him. Professors somehow forgave him for turning assignments in late because he smiled and acted embarrassed. Meanwhile, I was the opposite. Quiet. Careful. The kind of person who overthought texts before sending them. But somehow, Zayn decided we were best friends almost immediately. And once he did, there was no escaping him. "Terence!" he shouted across campus one afternoon during our sophomore year. "Tell me honestly. If I died tomorrow, would you cry?" I looked up from my laptop. "You're blocking the library entrance. That's not an answer. You're not dying tomorrow. Okay, but hypothetically." I sighed dramatically. "Yes, Zayn. I'd cry." He grinned. "Damn right you would." Then he sat across from me, stole half my fries without asking, and started talking about some disaster date he'd gone on the night before. That was how it always worked with us. He talked. I listened. He dragged me out to parties when I wanted to stay home. I helped him pass classes he barely attended. Somehow, over 4 years, he became the center of my life so gradually that I didn't even notice it happening. And that was the problem. Because somewhere along the way, friendship stopped being enough for me. I realized it one night during senior year. We'd gone to this crowded apartment party off campus. The music was loud, people were drunk and sweaty, and Zayn had disappeared 20 minutes earlier with some girl wearing a tiny silver dress. I should have expected it. But when I saw him come back into the kitchen with lipstick smeared near his jaw, laughing while she held onto his arm, something ugly twisted in my chest. Jealousy. Real jealousy. The kind that makes you feel sick. I left the party without telling anyone. Halfway back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. "Zayn. Where'd you go?" I stared at the screen. "Me. Tired." 3 dots appeared instantly. "Zayn. You okay?" That was the thing about him. He always noticed. Even when I desperately wished he wouldn't. By the time I got home, he was already waiting outside my building. "You seriously Irish goodbyed me?" he asked as I walked up. "You were busy." His expression shifted slightly. "Terence." I hated how easily he could read me. "I'm fine," I muttered. "You look pissed." "I'm not pissed." "You literally are." I unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. He followed immediately like he owned the place. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he asked. I tossed my keys onto the counter. "Nothing's going on." "Bullshit." I turned toward him too fast. "Why do you care so much?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Zayn blinked. Then his face softened. "Because you're my person," he said simply. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made everything worse. Because normal best friends probably didn't stare at each other like that in the middle of a dark kitchen at 1 in the morning. And they definitely didn't feel the kind of tension I felt every time Zayn got too close. I looked away first. "I'm just tired," I lied. For a second, either of us moved. Then he sighed quietly. "All right." But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked over to my fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat on the counter like he planned on staying a while. That was another thing about Zayn. He treated my apartment like it was his. At some point, he'd started sleeping over more often than not. Sometimes because we stayed up gaming too late. Sometimes because he claimed my couch was more comfortable than his bed. Eventually he stopped pretending and just climbed directly into my bed instead. The first time it happened, I nearly had a heart attack. Relax, he laughed when he saw my expression. I'm not trying to seduce you, princess. Easy for him to joke about. He didn't know sleeping beside him was absolute torture for me. Especially because Zayn was naturally touchy. The guy hugged everyone, leaned against people when he talked, rested his hand on your shoulder without thinking. But with me, it felt different. More intimate somehow. Like one night when we were watching a movie and he fell asleep with his head on my chest. Or the time he grabbed my hand while drunk crossing a street and didn't let go even after we reached the sidewalk. Or the mornings I'd wake up with his arm thrown over my waist like it belonged there. Every single time, I told myself it didn't mean anything. Because it couldn't mean anything. Zayn was straight. At least, that's what I kept repeating in my head. Until the night everything started changing. It happened in early October, about 2 months after graduation. We were both living in the city now. I'd gotten a marketing job downtown, and Zayn worked at a tattoo studio while trying to build his portfolio. That night, he showed up at my apartment soaked from the rain. You look homeless, I told him as he kicked off his shoes. Your greeting skills are terrible. You're dripping on my floor. Wow. You've changed. I handed him a towel, trying not to stare at the way his wet shirt clung to his chest. He caught me looking. I looked away immediately. But I noticed a tiny smirk on his face before he disappeared into my bathroom. 20 minutes later, he came out wearing one of my hoodies and gray sweatpants. Seeing him in my clothes always did something weird to me. You got food? He asked. Frozen pizza. Marry me. I snorted. You say that every time I feed you. Because it's true every time. We ended up eating on the couch while some terrible reality show played in the background. At some point, Zayn stretched out beside me, one arm behind his head. You ever think about how weird it is that we're adults now? He asked suddenly. All the time. I still feel 19. That explains a lot. He laughed softly. Then, after a pause, he looked at me. Not casually. Really looked at me. You know you're basically the only thing in my life that stayed the same? He said quietly. My chest tightened. What does that mean? It means... He hesitated. I don't know. You're just always there. Something about the way he said it made the room feel smaller. Warmer. Dangerous. I forced a laugh. That's because you're emotionally dependent on me. Probably. But he didn't laugh with me. Instead, his eyes stayed locked on mine. And for the first time in years, I had this terrifying thought. Maybe I wasn't the only one feeling something here. Maybe Zayn was scared too. And honestly, that possibility terrified me more than rejection ever could. After that night, things between us changed in ways that were almost impossible to explain. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It was smaller than that. More dangerous. Because once you start noticing tension with someone, you can't unnotice it. Especially when you live half your life around them. The next few weeks felt different every time Zayn touched me. And he touched me constantly. A hand on my lower back while squeezing past me in the kitchen. His knee pressed against mine during movie nights. Fingers brushing my wrist when he handed me something. Tiny things. Normal things. Except they didn't feel normal anymore. I started catching him staring too. Not in an obvious way. More like he'd look at me for a second too long before glancing away. And every time it happened, my stomach tightened. One Friday night, we met up with friends at this crowded rooftop bar downtown. I almost didn't go. Work had been brutal all week, and honestly, being around Zayn lately was exhausting in the worst possible way. Because every time I convinced myself I was imagining things, he'd do something that pulled me right back in. Like that night. I was standing at the bar waiting for drinks when some guy walked up beside me. Tall blonde dude. Probably around my age. You here alone? He asked. I gave him a polite smile. Not exactly. That usually means yes. I laughed awkwardly. Before I could answer, an arm suddenly wrapped around my shoulders from behind. He's with me, Zayn said casually. The guy immediately backed off. All right, man. My bad. I turned toward Zayn once the stranger walked away. What was that? What was what? You know exactly what. He shrugged innocently. Guy was bothering you. I could have handled it. I know. But he still didn't move his arm. My heart started beating harder the longer he stayed close. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes as he looked down at me. You okay? He asked quietly. That question again. Always that question. Because somehow Zayn noticed every shift in my mood before anyone else did. Yeah, I lied. His fingers squeezed my shoulder gently before he finally let go. The rest of the night felt strange after that. I noticed girls trying to flirt with him like usual, but Zayn barely paid attention. Instead, he kept drifting back toward me. At one point, our friend Mateo smirked while watching us from across the table. You two act like an old married couple, he said. I nearly choked on my drink. Zayn just laughed. Terence would make a terrible husband. Oh, very funny, I muttered. You're too controlling. You alphabetize your spice rack. That's called maturity. Mateo snorted. See? Married. The weird thing was how natural it felt. Like we already belonged to each other in some unspoken way. And maybe that's why I panicked later that night. We got back to my apartment around 1 in the morning, both slightly drunk. Zayn dropped onto my couch dramatically. I'm sleeping here. You say that like you ever ask permission anymore. True. I headed into the kitchen for water while he scrolled through his phone. A few minutes later, he wandered in behind me. The apartment was quiet except for rain tapping softly against the windows. You know something? He said suddenly. What? I think you looked jealous earlier. I froze. My pulse immediately spiked. What are you talking about? At the bar. I literally have no idea what you mean. That guy flirting with me. I laughed too quickly. You're insane. Zayn stepped closer. Too close. You sure? My throat went dry. He was looking at me differently again. That same unreadable intensity from a few weeks earlier. And suddenly I couldn't breathe properly. You're drunk, I muttered. Little bit. Go to sleep. But he didn't move. Neither of us did. The tension between us felt thick enough to choke on. Then Zayn smiled slightly. Not teasing. Nervous. Which somehow scared me more. You ever think maybe we crossed the line a long time ago? He asked quietly. I stared at him. What line? He swallowed once before answering. The friendship one. Every thought in my head crashed together at once. This was it. The moment I'd imagined 1,000 times and feared even more. Because if I answered wrong, I could lose him forever. And if I answered honestly? I wasn't sure either of us would survive it. Zayn. My voice sounded weak. His eyes searched mine carefully. Then, almost like he regretted saying it, he looked away first and laughed softly under his breath. Forget it. But I couldn't. Not after hearing that. Not after finally realizing I hadn't imagined any of this. You can't just say something like that and then pretend you didn't, I said quietly. He leaned back against the counter, jaw tense. I don't know what's going on with me lately. The honesty in his voice hit me harder than I expected. I keep thinking about you. My chest tightened painfully. Zayn. And it's messing with my head. He looked frustrated now. Confused. I've never. He exhaled sharply. I've never looked at a guy this way before. Hearing him say it out loud made the room spin slightly. For years I'd wanted this. Dreamed about it. So why did it suddenly feel terrifying? Because this was real now. And real things could fall apart. I don't want to ruin this, he admitted quietly. That almost broke me. Because that was exactly what I'd been afraid of too. You won't, I said automatically. But neither of us sounded convinced. For a long moment, we just stood there staring at each other in the dim kitchen light. Then Zayn spoke again. Tell me I'm crazy. I should have. I should have laughed this off and saved us both. Instead, I whispered, You're not crazy. The look on his face after that. God. Relief. Fear. Hope. All at once. And then suddenly he was moving toward me again. Slowly this time. Like he was giving me a chance to stop him. But I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Not when he was standing that close. Not when his eyes kept dropping to my mouth. You have no idea how long I've been trying not to do this, he said softly. Every nerve in my body lit up. Do what? But I already knew. His hand came up slowly, fingers brushing against my jaw. And I swear my heart nearly stopped. Because Zayn had touched me 1,000 times before. But never like this. Never carefully. Never like I was something precious. You can tell me to stop, he whispered. I should have. Instead, I leaned into his touch without even realizing it. And the second I did, something in his expression snapped. The restraint disappeared. Then he kissed me. Soft at first. Tentative. Like he still couldn't believe this was happening either. The second his lips touched mine, my entire body went weak. Years. I had spent years imagining what kissing Zayn would feel like. And somehow reality was worse. Because now I knew. Now I knew how perfectly he fit against me. How warm his mouth was. How his breathing hitched slightly when I kissed him back. A quiet sound escaped him, almost surprised, and suddenly his hand slid into my hair as he pulled me closer. The kiss deepened instantly. Messier. Nidia. Like all the tension between us finally broke open at once. I grabbed his hoodie without thinking, holding onto him like I was scared he'd disappear. Zayn kissed like he did everything else intensely. Like he'd been starving for it. And maybe he had been. Because when we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and laughed softly. Holy shit, he whispered. I couldn't even speak. My hands were shaking. Zayn noticed immediately. His expression softened. Hey, he murmured. You okay? I let out a weak laugh. There's that question again. His thumb brushed gently across my cheek. But this time, when I looked at him, I saw it clearly. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Something deeper. Something that terrified me because I already felt it too. And for the first time, I couldn't pretend anymore. I loved him. Neither of us knew what to do after the kiss. That was the strangest part. It wasn't awkward exactly. Just overwhelming. Zayn stayed close to me, his forehead still resting against mine while both of us tried to breathe normally again. I could feel his heartbeat through his chest. Fast. Almost matching mine. Then he laughed quietly under his breath. I definitely can't pretend that didn't happen. I smiled before I could stop myself. Good. His eyes lifted to mine instantly after I said it. The look on his face nearly ruined me. Because Zayn looked happy. Not confused. Not disgusted. Happy. You really wanted that too? He asked softly. I stared at him for a second. Are you serious? I don't know. He smiled nervously. I feel like my brain stopped working 10 minutes ago. That makes two of us. He laughed again, quieter this time. Then his hand slid down from my jaw to the back of my neck, fingers warm against my skin. You know what's messed up? He said. What? I thought I was imagining this. I swallowed hard. Since when? The question hung between us. Zayn looked away briefly before answering. A while. How long is a while? His expression turned embarrassed in a way I'd almost never seen before. Maybe since graduation. My heart stuttered. All summer, I kept catching myself wanting to touch you. He shook his head slightly. And every time you looked at me a certain way, I'd think about it for days after. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. because I'd spent months convincing myself I was alone in this. You could have said something, I whispered. I was scared. That hit me harder than anything else. Zayn wasn't scared of people. He flirted with strangers, talked his way out of anything, walked through life like nothing could touch him. But this mattered enough to scare him. Me too, I admitted quietly. His eyes softened immediately. Then, before I could think too hard about it, I kissed him again. This time there was nothing hesitant about it. Zayn reacted instantly, one hand gripping my waist while the other tangled into my hair again. The kiss turned deeper fast. Needia. Months of tension pouring out all at once. I could feel him smiling slightly against my mouth between kisses like he still couldn't believe this was real. Terence, he murmured softly at one point, and hearing my name like that nearly destroyed my self-control completely. I'd never heard him sound like that before. So warm. So affectionate. Like he was saying something he'd wanted to say for a long time. Eventually we pulled apart again, both breathing harder now. And suddenly reality crashed back in. What happened now? Were we dating? Still best friends? Some weird in-between disaster? Apparently Zayn was thinking the same thing because he let out a nervous breath and rubbed the back of his neck. So, he said. I laughed weakly. That's all you've got? I had a better speech in my head. Oh, did you? Yeah, but then you kissed me again and ruined it. I rolled my eyes, smiling despite myself. God, this was dangerous. Because I already knew I'd let him ruin me completely if he asked. Zayn watched me carefully for a second before speaking again. You know this isn't just some random thing for me, right? The teasing tone was gone now. He sounded serious. I know. I mean it, Terence. Something tightened in my chest. I've gotten involved with people before because it was easy. Because it didn't matter. His gaze locked onto mine. This matters. I didn't know what to say to that. So instead I stepped closer again until our bodies brushed lightly. Zayn exhaled shakily. You keep doing that and I'm gonna lose my mind. I smiled faintly. Maybe I want you to. Jesus Christ. But he was grinning now. Then his expression shifted slightly, becoming more thoughtful. You know what's weird? He asked. What? I always hated when people dated you. I blinked. What? It annoyed me. That's insane. I know. I stared at him in disbelief while he laughed at himself softly. I used to tell myself it was because they weren't good enough for you, he admitted. But honestly, I think I was just jealous. Hearing that nearly made my knees weak. Because I remembered every guy I'd dated over the years. And I remembered how strangely possessive Zayn acted around all of them. At the time, I thought he was just protective. Now everything looked different. You're telling me you've been subconsciously pining after me this whole time? I asked. Don't use the word pining. That's humiliating. I laughed for real then, and his expression softened instantly at the sound. God. I was so screwed. Because this already felt too natural. Like we'd accidentally skipped past the awkward stage and landed somewhere dangerously close to intimacy. Zayn glanced toward my bedroom eventually. Then back at me. You want me to leave? He asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. Because suddenly I realized he was giving me control. Trying not to push too far too fast. And somehow that made me want him even more. No, I admitted softly. His eyes darkened slightly. No, I want you to stay. For a second. Neither of us moved. Then Zayn reached for my hand carefully, almost like he was still afraid this might disappear. I intertwined our fingers immediately. The tiny breath he let out after that nearly shattered me. We headed toward my bedroom slowly, both quieter now. More aware of what this meant. The room felt different the second we stepped inside. More intimate. More dangerous. Zayn stood near the bed watching me carefully while I tried to act calmer than I felt. You're nervous, he said softly. So are you. Yeah. I smiled faintly. Good. He shook his head, laughing under his breath before stepping closer again. Then his hand settled gently on my waist. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just warm. Careful. Like he was learning me. I've wanted to do this for so long, he admitted quietly. That confession almost hurt to hear. Because I understood it too well. I slid my arms around his neck slowly, and the second I did, his entire body relaxed against mine. Like he'd been holding tension for months. We kissed again, slower this time. More affectionate than desperate. And honestly, that somehow felt even more intense. Because now I could feel everything underneath it. The friendship. The trust. The years of hidden feelings neither of us knew how to talk about. Zayn's hands moved carefully along my back while we kissed, and every touch felt impossibly intimate. At one point he pulled away just enough to look at me. You know what I realized? He murmured. What? I think I've been in love with you for a while. The words hit me so hard I actually stopped breathing for a second. He looked nervous immediately after saying it. Like maybe he'd gone too far. But all I could think was finally. Finally. Because I'd loved him quietly for years. And hearing him say it back felt almost unreal. I touched his face gently. I was afraid to admit that to myself. I whispered. Zayn's expression softened completely. Then he kissed me again, slower than before, like he was trying to memorize me. And somewhere between his arms around me and the quiet rain outside my apartment windows, I realized something terrifying. I'd spent years being afraid of losing him. But now I was even more afraid of how much I wanted to keep him forever. The next morning felt unreal. For a few seconds after waking up, I forgot everything that had happened. Then I felt warmth pressed against my back. An arm around my waist. Soft breathing against the back of my neck. And suddenly it all came rushing back at once. Zayn. I turned carefully, heart already pounding. He was still asleep beside me, curls messy across the pillow, one hand loosely gripping my shirt like even unconscious he didn't want me going too far. I'd seen him asleep 100 times before. But this felt different now. Dangerously intimate. Like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. My chest tightened painfully. Because I loved him. And somehow, impossibly, he loved me too. Zayn stirred slightly, blinking awake a second later. The moment his eyes landed on me, his entire face softened. Morning, he mumbled, voice rough from sleep. I smiled before I could stop myself. Morning. For a second we just looked at each other. Then suddenly he groaned and buried his face in my shoulder dramatically. What? I'm freaking out a little. I laughed quietly. You? Yes, me. Shut up. His arms tightened around me. I've never done this before. Something about hearing Zayn sound uncertain made my heart ache. You regret it? His head snapped up immediately. What? No. He looked genuinely horrified. Jesus, no. Relief hit me so hard it almost made me dizzy. I'm just. He exhaled slowly. I don't know what we are now. I understood that feeling completely. Because technically, overnight, my best friend had become something else. Something bigger. And honestly, that was terrifying. But it also felt right in a way I couldn't explain. We'll figure it out, I said softly. Zayn studied my face carefully. Then he smiled slightly. Why do you always sound calmer than me? Because one of us has to. That's annoying. I rolled my eyes affectionately. He kissed me again before I could answer. Slow. Sleepy. Warm. It still shocked me how natural it felt. Like kissing him was something my body already understood. When he pulled back, he stayed close enough that our noses brushed slightly. You know I'm probably gonna get obsessed with you now, right? He murmured. You weren't already? He laughed softly against my mouth. God. I could get addicted to this way too fast. The entire weekend passed in this strange little bubble where neither of us wanted to leave my apartment. We ordered takeout. Watched terrible movies. kept accidentally staring at each other and smiling like idiots. And every once in a while, one of us would pause and visibly remember that this was real now. Like Sunday afternoon when I was making coffee and suddenly felt Zayn wrap his arms around me from behind. I nearly dropped the mug. "You're clingy," I muttered. "You love it." Unfortunately, he was right. His chin rested on my shoulder while he watched me pour coffee. Then, after a quiet second, he asked softly, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The question instantly made my stomach tighten. I knew what he meant. About my feelings. I stared down at the counter for a moment before answering. "Because you were my best friend." "That's not really an answer." "Yes, it is." I turned toward him carefully. "Loving you already hurt enough. I didn't think I could survive losing you too." The honesty in my voice surprised even me. Zayn's expression changed immediately. Softened. Almost guilty. "Terence, I'm serious." I laughed weakly. "You have no idea how hard it was pretending I didn't feel anything every time you brought girls around." His eyes widened slightly. "You were jealous?" "Violently." That made him laugh. Not mocking. Almost affectionate. "I wish I'd known." "No, you don't." "I really do." He leaned against the counter beside me, shoulder brushing mine. "I spent years thinking nobody understood me the way you did," he admitted quietly. "And every time something good happened, you were the first person I wanted to tell." My chest tightened again. "Then at some point," he shook his head slowly, "you stopped feeling like just my best friend." The way he said it made me look away instinctively. Because hearing Zayn talk about his feelings still felt almost too intense. "I hated seeing you with other people too," he admitted. I blinked at him. "You dated like 3 girls in college. And every single time, I compared them to you." That completely shut my brain down. "Zayn, I'm serious." He smiled softly. "Nobody ever felt right." The look in his eyes after saying that nearly destroyed me. Because there was nothing casual there anymore. Nothing uncertain. Just affection so obvious it scared me. Then his phone buzzed loudly on the counter, ruining the moment. He glanced at the screen and groaned. "Mateo. Answer it." "No. Zayn." He sighed dramatically before picking up. "Hello?" I could hear Mateo's voice yelling immediately through the speaker. "You're alive?" Zayn winced. "Why are you screaming?" "Because you disappeared for 2 days. I thought you got kidnapped." "I'm fine." Mateo went quiet for a second. Then suspiciously, "You got involved with someone, didn't you?" I nearly choked on my coffee. Zayn looked at me with pure amusement. "Maybe." "Oh my God!" Mateo gasped dramatically. "Who is he?" I froze. Zayn noticed immediately. And instead of answering, he reached over and squeezed my hand gently. That tiny gesture calmed me more than it should have. "I'll tell you later," he said. Mateo immediately started yelling again. But honestly, I barely heard him. Because I couldn't stop staring at Zayn. At the way he held my hand so naturally now. At the softness in his eyes whenever he looked at me. At how terrifyingly easy this already felt. And that scared me a little. Because I'd spent so long convincing myself I could survive loving him silently. But now that I actually had him, I wasn't sure I'd survive losing this version of us. Not anymore. Especially not after later that night. We were lying in bed half asleep. The room dark except for city lights filtering through the curtains. Zayn was tracing lazy patterns against my arm absent-mindedly. Then suddenly he said quietly, "I think you're home to me." My chest physically hurt after hearing that. I turned toward him slowly. "What?" He looked embarrassed immediately after saying it. But he didn't take it back. "When things are bad," he admitted softly, "you're the person I want." I didn't know how to respond to something like that. Because no one had ever looked at me the way Zayn did right then. Like I mattered that much. So instead, I moved closer and kissed him softly. And in the dark, with his arms tightening around me like instinct, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of admitting I loved him anymore. I was afraid of how completely he already owned my heart. Keeping our relationship secret lasted exactly 9 days. Not because we planned to tell anyone. Mostly because Zayn had apparently forgotten how to act normal around me. "You're staring again," I muttered one night while we sat across from each other at Mateo's apartment. "I literally am not." "You literally are." Zayn smirked without even trying to deny it. Across the room, Mateo narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Oh my God!" Both of us froze. "What?" Zayn asked too quickly. Mateo pointed between us dramatically. "Something happened." "Nothing happened," I said immediately. "Wow," Mateo replied dryly. "That was the most guilty sentence I've ever heard." Zayn started laughing beside me, which absolutely did not help. Then Mateo gasped so loudly everyone turned toward him. "Wait!" My stomach dropped. "No way," he whispered. "No freaking way." Zayn buried his face in his hands. And honestly, watching the guy who flirted fearlessly with strangers panic over this was weirdly adorable. Mateo looked at me first. Then Zayn. Then back at me again. "You two are together?" Silence. Then slowly, Zayn reached over and intertwined our fingers under the table. Mateo screamed. Actually screamed. "Oh, I knew it!" he shouted. "Jesus Christ!" I muttered. "You idiots have been in love with each other for years." That made both of us blink. "What?" I asked. Mateo stared at me like I was stupid. "Terence, you looked at him like a Victorian widow every time he brought a girl around." Zayn started choking laughing beside me. "And you," Mateo continued, pointing aggressively at Zayn, "used to act like every guy who talked to Terence personally offended you." "We weren't exactly subtle," Zayn admitted. "No shit." I covered my face with one hand, mortified. But honestly, part of me felt relieved too. Like maybe this didn't have to be terrifying anymore. Maybe people wouldn't think we were ruining something. Maybe they'd just think finally. After that, things started shifting naturally. Our friends adapted weirdly fast. Almost suspiciously fast. One night during drinks, our friend Lena watched Zayn rest his hand on my knee absent-mindedly and sighed dramatically. "You know what's annoying?" she said. "What?" I asked. "You two somehow got more disgusting after dating." Zayn looked delighted by that. "We're cute," he argued. "You're codependent." Also true. I laughed while Lena rolled her eyes. But the truth was, dating Zayn felt easy. Not perfect. We still argued over stupid things. He still left cabinets open constantly. I still got annoyed when he ignored texts for 6 hours. But underneath everything was this terrifying level of comfort. Like we already knew each other too well to pretend. And honestly, that scared me sometimes. Because every day I loved him more. And every day it became clearer that losing him would absolutely destroy me. I think Zayn felt it too. Especially after the first real fight we had. It happened almost 2 months into our relationship. I'd had a brutal week at work, and Zayn kept canceling plans because the tattoo studio was overloaded with clients. By Friday night, I was exhausted and irritated. So when he texted me at 10 saying he still wasn't done at work, I snapped. Me. Forget it. A minute later my phone rang immediately. I ignored it. Then again. And again. Finally I answered with a sigh. "What? You're mad." "No shit. Terence. You've cancelled on me 3 times this week." "I know, I'm sorry." "You keep saying that." Silence. Then more quietly. "I'm trying." That should have softened me. Instead I felt even worse. Because I knew he was trying. And somehow that made me angrier. Maybe this was easier when we were just friends, I muttered before I could stop myself. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Complete silence on the other end. Then quietly. "You don't mean that." The hurt in his voice made my chest ache instantly. You know what? He interrupted softly. I'll talk to you later. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone feeling sick. Because for the first time since we got together, I'd heard real distance in his voice. And suddenly every old fear came rushing back. What if we had ruined this? What if loving him was too much pressure eventually? Around midnight, someone knocked on my apartment door. I already knew it was him. Zayn looked exhausted when I opened it. Dark circles under his eyes. Hoodie half-zipped. Hair messy from running his hands through it. But the second he saw me, his expression softened anyway. And somehow that made me feel even guiltier. I'm sorry, I said immediately. He sighed quietly before stepping inside. No, I get why you're upset. That doesn't make what I said okay. He leaned against the counter, rubbing tiredly at his face. For a second neither of us spoke. Then finally he looked at me. Do you really think this was easier before? The question hurt. Because honestly? No. Loving him silently had been torture. I didn't mean it, I admitted quietly. Zayn nodded once, but he still looked unsettled. I know this is new for both of us, he said. But you can't say stuff like that when you're angry. I know. Because I already spent years thinking I couldn't have you. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. That absolutely wrecked me. I stepped toward him immediately. Zayn. And now that I do, he continued softly, I need you to understand something. His eyes locked onto mine. I'm not going anywhere. God. Something in me broke hearing that. Because underneath all my anxiety, all my fear, there was still this terrified part of me waiting for him to realize I mattered less than I hoped. But he was standing here after midnight, exhausted from work, just to make sure we were okay. I reached for him carefully. The second my hands touched his waist, his entire body relaxed. I'm sorry, I whispered again. Zayn exhaled shakily before wrapping his arms around me. And suddenly we were just holding each other silently in the middle of my kitchen. I hate fighting with you, he murmured into my hair. Me too. You're my favorite person. That almost made me emotional immediately. I pulled back slightly to look at him. You know something? What? I think I've been waiting for you my entire life. The look on his face after that. Jesus. Like I'd reached directly into his chest. Then he kissed me softly. Not desperate this time. Not frantic. Just full of affection so deep it almost hurt. And standing there wrapped in his arms, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid to admit I loved him anymore. I was afraid because he loved me just as much. By December, Zayn had basically moved into my apartment without either of us officially acknowledging it. His clothes were everywhere. His toothbrush sat beside mine. Half the food in my fridge belonged to him. And somehow, every night ended the same way, with him wrapped around me in bed like he physically couldn't sleep unless we were touching. Not that I minded. Actually, that was the problem. I minded too much. Because loving Zayn was becoming terrifyingly easy. One cold Thursday night, we were lying on the couch watching some awful horror movie while rain hit the windows outside. Well, I was watching the movie. Zayn was mostly watching me. You're doing it again, I muttered without looking away from the TV. What? The staring thing. I like your face. That's weird. You like my face too. Unfortunately true. I finally glanced over at him, and immediately my chest tightened the way it always did now. God, he looked comfortable. Happy. One arm thrown over the back of the couch, curls messy, wearing my old college hoodie that somehow looked better on him than it ever did on me. You know, he said casually, I think we skipped the honeymoon phase. I frowned. What does that mean? It means we already act like an old married couple. That's because you're emotionally attached to me like a baby duck. Zayn gasped dramatically. You wound me. I laughed quietly. And the second I did, his expression softened instantly. That happened all the time now. like he couldn't help reacting whenever I smiled. "You have no idea how obsessed I am with you," he murmured suddenly. The sincerity in his voice caught me completely off guard. "Zayn, I'm serious." He moved closer on the couch until his leg rested over mine. "It's actually embarrassing." I tried to joke back, but honestly, hearing him talk like that still overwhelmed me sometimes. Because part of me still wasn't fully used to being loved by him openly. Maybe because I'd spent so many years convincing myself it would never happen. "You're staring now," he pointed out softly. I blinked, then laughed under my breath. "Shut up," he grinned. Then his phone buzzed loudly beside him. He glanced down at the screen and groaned. "My mom! You say that like she's the IRS. She's worse." I snorted while he answered the call. "Hey, Ma." I half listened while pretending to watch the movie, mostly hearing Zayn answer questions absent-mindedly while tracing circles against my leg with his fingers. Then suddenly he went quiet. His eyes flicked toward me briefly. He said slowly into the phone. "Actually, there is someone." My stomach dropped instantly. He never told his family about us before. I muted the TV immediately. Zayn looked weirdly nervous now. "No, not a girl," he admitted carefully. A long silence followed. I could faintly hear his mother speaking loudly through the phone. Then Zayn rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "His name's Terence." My heartbeat started hammering. He looked at me while listening to whatever she said next. Then slowly, unexpectedly, he smiled. "No, you already know him." Another pause. And suddenly Zayn burst out laughing. "What do you mean you knew?" I stared at him in disbelief. His mother knew? Apparently she absolutely did. "Ma," he groaned dramatically. "You can't just say that." Now he looked genuinely embarrassed. Which honestly was adorable. Eventually he hung up while shaking his head. "What?" I asked immediately. Zayn collapsed back against the couch dramatically. "She said she's been waiting for us to figure our shit out since college." I stared at him. "She knew?" "Apparently everyone knew except us." That made me laugh harder than it should have. But underneath the humor, warmth spread slowly through my chest. Because hearing him casually tell his mom about me felt important. Real. "You okay?" he asked softly after noticing I'd gone quiet. That question again. Always that question. And honestly, I loved that he cared enough to keep asking. "Yeah," I admitted quietly. "Just thinking. Dangerous." I rolled my eyes while he smiled. Then after a moment, his expression shifted slightly. More serious now. "You know I love you, right?" The words still hit me hard every single time. No matter how often he said them. Because part of me still remembered all those years I thought I'd never hear them at all. "I know," I whispered. Zayn studied my face carefully. Then softer. "Sometimes I think you still don't believe it." That immediately made my throat tighten. Because maybe he was right. Maybe some small part of me was still waiting for this to disappear. "I'm trying to," I admitted. His expression broke my heart a little. "Come here." I moved into his lap without hesitation, arms wrapping loosely around his neck. And immediately his hands settled against my waist like instinct. "You know what I realized?" he murmured against my neck. "What?" "You never asked me for reassurance." I blinked slightly. "What?" "You get insecure sometimes," he said quietly. "I can tell." I looked away instinctively. "And instead of talking about it, you just get quieter." Damn him for noticing everything. "I don't want to be annoying," I admitted softly. Zayn actually looked offended. "Terence." "What?" "You could never annoy me by needing reassurance." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. He tilted my chin gently until I looked at him again. "I love you," he said carefully. "And I'm gonna keep loving you even when your brain tries convincing you otherwise." That nearly ruined me completely. Because nobody had ever understood me like this before. Nobody had ever looked at my fears and treated them gently instead of making me feel stupid for them. "You're too good to me," I whispered. Zayn smiled softly. "No," he murmured. "I'm just in love with you." And somehow, hearing that still felt unreal. A few weeks later, things got even more real. Because that was when he handed me a key to his apartment. Technically, he barely used the place anymore, but still. The tiny silver key sat in my palm while I stared at him. "You don't have to look so scared," he teased softly. "I'm not scared." "You absolutely are." Unfortunately, he was right. Because this meant something. Something permanent. "You sure?" I asked quietly. Zayn's expression softened immediately. Then he stepped closer and pressed a kiss to my forehead. "Terence," he murmured, "I've been sure about you for a really long time." And standing there in his apartment with his arms around me, I realized the truth. I wasn't afraid to admit I loved him anymore. I was afraid because for the first time in my life, someone loved me in exactly the same deep, terrifying way. Christmas came faster than either of us expected. And somehow, despite everything we'd already been through together, meeting Zayn's family as his boyfriend terrified me more than falling in love with him had. "You're spiraling again," Zayn said from the driver's seat while we sat at a red light. "I'm literally sitting here quietly." "Yeah, but you have your stress face on." I frowned. "I don't have a stress face." "You absolutely do." I crossed my arms while he laughed softly beside me. The truth was, I couldn't stop overthinking. Not because I thought his family would react badly. His mom already knew about us apparently better than we did. But because this felt important. Real in a way that made my chest tight. "You know they already love you, right?" Zayn asked quietly after a moment. "That's not helping." "It should. It's making me more nervous." He grinned. "Why?" "Because now I have expectations to live up to." Zayn reached over immediately, squeezing my thigh gently. "Terence." "What?" "You could show up wearing a trash bag and my mom would still pick you over me." I laughed despite myself. "That's definitely not true. She literally asked if you were coming before she asked about me." "That's because she likes stable children." "Rude." But he was smiling. And honestly, the soft way he kept looking at me during the drive calmed me more than anything else could have. About 20 minutes later, we pulled into his parents' driveway. Before I could unbuckle my seatbelt, Zayn touched my wrist lightly. I looked over at him. "You okay?" he asked softly. There it was again. That question. Always gentle. Always genuine. And suddenly I realized something. No matter how anxious I got, no matter how much I overthought things, Zayn never made me feel difficult for it. He just stayed. "I'm okay," I said quietly. Then after a second, "As long as you stay near me." The look on his face after hearing that nearly destroyed me. "Always," he murmured. God. I loved him so much it physically hurt sometimes. The second we walked inside, his mother immediately pulled me into a hug. "Finally," she said dramatically. "I was wondering how long you two planned on torturing everyone." Zayn groaned behind me. "Ma. I'm serious. You boys stared at each other like romance movie characters for years." I buried my face in my hands while she laughed. Dinner somehow made everything worse and better at the same time. Worse because his family kept making comments. Better because every single one of those comments made it painfully obvious how accepted I already was. At one point, his younger sister leaned across the table and smirked at us. "You know what's gross?" she asked. "What?" Zayn replied suspiciously. "You two are exactly the same person now." "That's not true," I argued. She pointed at us immediately. "You both just reached for your drinks at the exact same time." Zayn looked delighted by this information. "I knew we were soulmates." "Please stop talking," his sister muttered. But under the table, I felt Zayn's hand slide into mine anyway. And honestly, that tiny gesture almost overwhelmed me. Because 6 months ago, I never thought this would happen. Never thought I'd sit at a holiday dinner with the guy I loved openly holding my hand like he was proud of me. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Zayn and I ended up outside on the back porch together. Snow covered the yard lightly, glowing under the porch lights. "It's freezing," I muttered. "And yet you're still out here. Unfortunately, I'm emotionally attached to you. That's true love." I rolled my eyes while he laughed softly. Then, after a quiet moment, his expression shifted slightly. More serious now. "You know what my mom asked me earlier?" "What?" she asked when I knew I was in love with you. My heartbeat sped up immediately. "And?" Zayn leaned against the porch railing beside me. "I think it was graduation night." I blinked. "What?" He smiled faintly. "You fell asleep on my shoulder after the party." His eyes softened at the memory. "And I remember thinking I'd never felt calmer with anyone in my life." "God. You want to know when I knew?" I asked quietly. He turned toward me immediately. "When?" I laughed softly under my breath. "Second year of college." "Seriously? You got food poisoning and demanded I stay beside you for 2 straight days." Zayn groaned dramatically. "That's your romantic realization story? You literally cried because you thought you were dying." "I was very sick." "You had a stomach bug." "I suffered." I laughed harder, and immediately his expression softened again the way it always did when he made me smile. Then suddenly he stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel warmth through our jackets. "You know something?" he murmured. "What?" "I don't think I was ever afraid of loving you." That caught me off guard. "You weren't?" He shook his head slowly. "I was afraid you'd never love me back." The honesty in his voice hit me hard. Because all those years, we'd both been terrified of exactly the same thing. I reached up slowly, touching his face gently. "You idiot," I whispered affectionately. Zayn smiled softly. Then he kissed me. Slow and warm in the freezing winter air. And standing there under soft porch lights with snow falling around us, I realized something important. For years, I'd been afraid to admit to myself that I loved him. Because loving Zayn felt too big. Too terrifying. Too life-changing. But now I understood the truth. The scary part was never loving him. The scary part was how easily he became my entire heart. By January, loving Zayn had become part of my routine in the most dangerous way possible. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming every second. Just constant. Like breathing. He'd kiss my forehead while half asleep before work. I'd make his coffee exactly how he liked it without thinking. We'd argue over what to order for dinner, and somehow end up sharing fries anyway. And every once in a while I'd catch myself looking at him during completely ordinary moments and think, "Holy shit. That's my person." Which was both comforting and terrifying. Because the more real this became, the more I understood how badly losing him would wreck me. That fear never completely disappeared. Even months later. Especially because Zayn loved loudly. Completely. Without hesitation. One night in late February, I came home exhausted after a brutal shift at work. The second I walked into my apartment, I smelled food. And heard music playing softly from the kitchen. Zayn looked up from the stove wearing one of my hoodies and smiled immediately when he saw me. "There he is." Something in my chest loosened instantly. "You cooked?" I asked. "Don't sound so shocked." "I'm shocked because last time you cooked, you almost poisoned us." "That happened once." "It happened twice." He rolled his eyes dramatically while walking over to me. Then his hand settled automatically on my waist. "How was work?" I sighed tiredly. "Terrible." His expression softened immediately. "Come here." Before I could answer, he pulled me against him gently. And honestly, that was enough to make the entire day feel survivable again. I buried my face against his shoulder, while he rubbed slow circles against my back. "You know," he murmured, "I really like taking care of you." That made my chest ache unexpectedly. because nobody had ever said something like that to me before. Not casually. Not sincerely. You already do, I whispered. Zayn pulled back slightly just to look at me. Then quietly. Good God. I loved him so much. Dinner that night ended up forgotten because we got distracted talking on the couch for almost 3 hours. That was another thing about us. Even after years together as friends and months together as boyfriends, we still somehow never ran out of things to say. At some point, I noticed Zayn watching me again. Softly. Carefully. What? I asked. He smiled a little. I'm thinking. Dangerous. Very. I laughed quietly while he reached over and took my hand. Then after a second, his expression turned serious. Can I ask you something? Sure. He hesitated briefly. What's the scariest part about this for you? The question caught me off guard. But honestly, I already knew the answer. You. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Me? I nodded. I've never needed someone this much before. The vulnerability in my own voice made me look away instinctively. But Zayn squeezed my hand immediately. Terence. I mean it, I admitted quietly. You became the most important person in my life so gradually I didn't even notice it happening. His expression softened completely. And that scares you? Sometimes. Why? I laughed weakly. Because what if something happens? Zayn stared at me for a second. Then suddenly he moved closer on the couch until our knees touched. Nothing's happening. You don't know that. I know I love you. The certainty in his voice hit me hard. And I know I'm still gonna love you when we're old and annoying. I snorted softly. You're already annoying. True. But he was still looking at me seriously. Terence, he said quietly, you don't have to be scared every time something makes you happy. That sentence nearly broke me. Because maybe he understood me better than I understood myself. I'd spent so much of my life expecting good things to disappear eventually that part of me never fully relaxed into happiness. But Zayn noticed. Of course he noticed. He always did. I'm trying, I admitted softly. I know. Then he kissed me gently. Slow enough that it felt less like passion and more like reassurance. And honestly, that somehow affected me even more. Later that night, we ended up in bed tangled together beneath blankets while rain hit the windows outside. Zayn was half asleep already, one arm around my waist. I should have been sleeping too. Instead, I just watched him quietly in the dark. Because moments like this still didn't feel fully real sometimes. Like eventually I'd wake up and discover none of this had actually happened. Almost like he sensed me staring, Zayn opened one eye slightly. That's creepy, he mumbled sleepily. I laughed under my breath. Sorry. You're lucky I love you. The casual way he said it made my chest tighten. Then after a second, still half asleep, he pulled me closer against him. So stop overthinking and go to bed. I blinked. How did you know I was overthinking? Because I know you. Simple as that. And maybe that was the whole story right there. He knew me. Completely. Every anxious thought. Every quiet mood. Every hidden fear. And somehow, after seeing all of it, he loved me anyway. Actually loved me more because of it. I pressed closer to him slowly, listening to his heartbeat beneath my ear. Then quietly, before I could stop myself, I whispered, I'm really glad it was you. Zayn's arm tightened around me immediately. Even half asleep, he heard it. And a second later, his lips brushed softly against my hair. Always gonna be me, he murmured. I closed my eyes after that. And for the first time in years, loving someone didn't feel terrifying anymore. It just felt like home.